Okay, Walter Bauer in the 30s wrote this great book, Orthodoxy and Heresy in Earliest Christianity. And he showed by an exhaustive and fascinating examination of every bit of surviving ecclesiastical literature and fragments of heresy writings and so on, that there was no one definitive version of Christianity in the beginning. That depending on where you went in the Roman Empire in the 2nd and 3rd century, Christianity might mean a lot of different things. If you went to Edessa, where the King Abgarus supposedly sent a letter to Jesus and all that stuff. This was the first Christian kingdom, but what passed for Christianity there was Marcionism. They were there first, and when what we call Orthodoxy or Catholicism came in, they had to call themselves the Paulicians, named after Palut, their bishop. But Christian was already taken, and it meant Marcionite. It's pretty apparent that in Syria and in Egypt, Gnosticism and Encretism were Christianity, and false apostolic credentials and pedigrees had to be devised later by Eusebius and other functionaries of the triumphant Catholic Church. Mark, the disciple of Peter, came and founded the church in Alexandria, and he was as orthodox as the day is long. And yet we hear about a secret gospel of Mark, if that's legitimate. It wasn't even known in the time of Bauer, but it's a good example, where you've got Clement of Alexandria talking about early weird gospels that he thought Mark actually wrote, and the Encratites in Asia Minor, the ones that believed in the celibacy gospel. Just look at the great book, The Legend and the Apostle, by the great Dennis R. MacDonald. He wrote this in the 80s. I think in 1983 this book came out, where he showed the Encratites viewed themselves as Pauline Christians. The pastoral epistles written against them, including the Marcionites and other Encratites, are trying to co-opt Paul for a Catholic view. And on it goes. The letters between Jesus and Abgarus are attempts to retroject Catholic Christianity into the time of the so-called apostolic mission to the Gentiles. Even according to the New Testament, the church in Rome had been founded by slaves, merchants, etc., before any apostle ever got there, and was riven by sectarian disputes about the Torah and so on. The Ignatian epistles, whenever they're from in the 2nd century, witness already huge disputes between Docetists and Judaizers and sacramentalists and so forth. And on it goes. There were all different versions of Christianity. Look at the New Testament. You've got, as F.C. Bauer pointed out, disputes all over the place. If you think it was written in the 1st century, you've got Hellenistic, Pauline, law-free Christians going at the jugular of Jewish Torah Christians and vice versa, plus incipient Gnosticism. But if you think it was written later, you got real Gnosticism, as Schmitholz argued for, and Acts turns out to be about Catholicism, which the author Polycarp advocated over against Marcionism, represented by their figurehead Paul. It doesn't matter really which position you take on the dating of these epistles. It shows us that there was no standard of orthodoxy. Now that doesn't, let me say, there was no one standard of orthodoxy. Naturally, each group believed in some kind of orthodoxy, their view, right? I quoted Ray Summers last time, again here. I'm the only Orthodox Christian I know. Aren't you? Well, yeah, that's right. So everybody believed the other guy was wrong. So was there any central way of telling? Well, the people that came up with our Orthodox/Catholic Church, an institution that split only 1,000 years later, so let's just call it the emerging Catholic Church. they managed to out-propagandize all the other groups in ways Bauer mentioned, caricaturing them and rewriting their origins to make it appear that the heretics were just a string of weirdos, one the successor of the last, none of them really representing any large segment of Christians. And they were all just troublemakers sent by Satan, but that the apostles had taught all over the known world the kind of faith we find in the Apostles' Creed, summarized in these Orthodox Catholic fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian in the late 2nd century. That was the real Christianity. Jesus had taught it to the disciples who became apostles, and they taught it to the bishops that they appointed in their various churches all over the empire, and they taught it to the bishops that replaced them, and so on down the line, and they all educated their own flocks. And then these stinking Gnostics and other heretics sent by Satan began to infiltrate the churches and make trouble just for the heck of it, and hence the polemics. But it doesn't appear that's the case. That was just the version of the story told by the winners, who won by superior propaganda and superior organization. The Gnostics, most of them were little study groups here and there with no real organization. Some did have organization, but they were little groups within larger Catholic churches and so on. Some did have their own, but got persecuted out of existence, like Marcionites and Gnostics. What was the Catholic Church that finally prevailed? Where was their type of Christianity born? Was it what was actually taught by Jesus? I don't think Bauer gets into this much, but I think it's pretty clear that, based on some things Harnack and others have said, I think that it is a mistake to say, as Bart Ehrman and other good and respectable scholars do, that there was already in the early days a proto-Orthodox option, as if there were already Protestants and Catholics and so on. I don't think that's true, because it appears to me that what we know of as Catholic Orthodox Christianity is a fusion of ideas that made better, more complete sense by themselves in other frameworks. Harnack said, surely the idea of an earthly Jesus, whether he had a fleshly body or didn't, that's secondary. The idea that an earthly Jesus is a temporary manifestation of some heavenly, eternal being, that's got to come from Gnosticism, where it's much more worked out and makes more sense, one might say. Even Trinitarianism appears to be a simplification of the Godhead, the pleroma of Valentinus, where there are 365 persons in the divine nature. The idea of the sacraments, that seems to come from the Jesus mystery religion, where the Old Testament Yahweh had long been a counterpart to Dionysus and Osiris and others. He had anciently been a dying and rising god, and he continued on in popular Judaism that way, and Jesus was identified with him, as Margaret Barker has shown, that he's never called the Son of the Lord. He is the Lord, the Son of El, just like ancient Israel knew. Yahweh was the son of El Elyon. Okay, so the idea of the dying and rising God, in whose saving contest one participated by virtue of a sacramental reenactment of it. Well, that was in the air all over the Mediterranean world, and it did have deep biblical roots. That's where they got the sacramental salvation idea. And what about the Gospels? Well, these were Old Testament stories rewritten, some of them by Marcionites who had ostensibly rejected the Old Testament but still liked the stories, so they rewrote them starring Jesus, or Catholics who liked the Old Testament didn't repudiate it, but still thought these stories were foreshadowing Jesus. So they copied Jesus versions of Moses stories and so on. So there was an implicit Jesus hero cult, like there had been a Hercules religion. And here are the three major components: the Gnostic Christology, the earthly Jesus as a divine hero or a demigod, and Jesus, the dying and rising Savior God, from three distinct Christian religions, Christian versions of thriving religious forms at the time. These things don't seem to need each other, but it would be easy enough to combine them into a kind of a theological chimera, especially if one sect was succeeding over others and the others were losing ground and sought any port in a storm. I was at a conference last weekend in Florida where representatives of New Thought religions were discussing whether their doctrine was compatible with that of the Course in Miracles. If so, well, then why not teach that in New Thought churches, as many do? Why were they even discussing this? Well, because the numbers in the New Thought churches are going down. And so you start looking for somebody else to help carry the burden. And thus, that may be what happened. The other Gnostics, we know, went to Catholic churches and kept their mouth shut. Well, they're preaching a simplified, bastardized version of the truth, but we'll just talk with the elite in our study groups and go to church on Sunday with them. Why not? It's better than nothing. And the same is probably true of the Jesus mystery religion. So that's what I think. That this composite of these three earlier autonomous themes eventually won out because it was shrewder institutionally.